with the Potomac Bead Company, and I am going to be showing you today a bracelet design that was done by Anna, our manager at our headquarters store. And this we're entitling the Happy Harvest bracelet. It uses crescent beads and 2-hole bars and is a good use of the crescents and using up some crescents if you happen to do my Slice of Heaven necklace. The Slice of Heaven necklace creates little balls of the crescent beads, and for a lot of them I suggested you mixing and doing a large mixture of colors. So you may have some colors left, and this Happy Harvest bracelet would be great for that. Kind of looks like a pumpkin or squash depending on what colors you do it. It's going to look like kind of a nice fall tone. However, you can also do it in Christmas colors, you could do it in Halloween colors. It's really versatile. If you need any of the materials to do this Happy Harvest bracelet, below the video, in addition to me listing them out, is a date stamp that says when the video was produced. If you look below there, there's usually a down arrow or a show more button. You can click on that and it'll give you links to the crescents and the 2-hole bars, as well as the seed beads and all of the materials that are used. So to do the Happy Harvest bracelet, again, we are using the crescent bead and the 2-hole bar. I'm going to be using a collection of them. Anna has the hyacinth here in her crescent. I have the opaque red bronze, I have the cranberry, I have olive, I have the dark gold, and I have the Pacifica poppy seed. So I'll be using all of those in the design to get a nice color arrangement and array of different fall colors. In addition to the crescent beads, and there's 3 crescent beads per little melon or gourd here. All in all, Anna has 13 on her bracelet. So 3 times 13 will give you that number that you need. So that's why I'm using a bunch of different colors, because I have some to use up and you're really not using that many crescents. Likewise, we're not actually using that many bars. It's that number 3 again, times however many you have to do. So I have 3 here that I will be using a variety of colors, and I have that 2-hole bar in the bronze berry oxidized, the vintage copper, the brass gold, and the Aztec or flax gold that I'll be mixing into these different crescent beads. In addition to the crescents and the 2-hole bars, the seed beads that we'll be using are 15-ohs and an 11-oh. The 11-oh, I have the Duracoat Opaque Hawthorn as my 11-oh color, giving that nice kind of connection of that warm orangish yellow or greenish yellow. In addition to that, I have 2 15-ohs. I have the champagne and then the lime, that lime color AB to go in between as my 15s to play around with. So I'm going to be using both colors as I draw in and make the bracelet. The whole thing is going to be strung on some 0.006 wildfire beading thread, and with the fall theme, I am using the green color. So that 0.006 green color. I'm also using a size 10 English beading needle. You can use a 10 or a 12 for this technique. It's not going to matter which one. It's not going to affect the project. So whichever one you're more comfortable with is going to be the easiest thing for you to use. So as we create and as we design, we'll have that nice and handy. Additionally, you may want to have a thread zap or a cord cutter with you to cut the thread off the end of the spool, as well as to burn down any thread ends or connection points. I also like to have a needle nose or a flat nose pliers handy to flatten out the end of the thread to make it much easier to thread the needle. At the very end, when I add the clasp, I'm using one of the Claspgarten clasps, and this is a push clasp with that nice gold and crystal design that's going to go really nicely with that nice crystal color. So I have the clasp really to kind of highlight and finish off the design. So those are the materials that I have. This bracelet is built in 1 increment. So we're going to start at one end and we're going to add and continue the whole bracelet. It's a lot of looping and a lot of kind of staying with me as we go in and create one. I'll create 2 with you in the video, and then you'll be on your own basically to keep creating, because it's the same thing over and over. Something that I forget to say a lot with this YouTube video is you can actually slow down the video, usually in the bottom right hand corner, depending on what actual device you're listening to or watching on. You can actually slow down the speed of the video. You can also do it on loop, that you can kind of go back to where you were, as well as turn it up and change the volume and all of that good thing. So to get started, I am going to get started with a couple of my different colors of my crescents laid out, as well as my bricks or my bars laid out, and then get ready with my 15-0s and my 11-0s in little piles ready to work with, and about 5 feet of thread on your beading needle. So to get started, what we're going to be doing is actually adding a stop bead. A stop bead is a bead that is not part of a project that we're going to take down to the end of the thread. And generally speaking, if you still have the clasp to leave on, you're going to leave about 8 to 10 inches of thread after the stop bead, so you can go back and actually add the clasp onto the thread. The needle is taken through that stop bead 2 times away from that end of that 8 inches or so, and that's going to stop the beads from falling off the actual thread. It is also then going to be taken off the project, and enough thread is allowed to let me put on my clasp at the very end. To start this design, it's actually going to be done almost in a tubular fashion. So I have kind of the sample piece that I was playing around with, trying a little bit different size beads, and I decided after playing around with it to go back to Anna's standard size. I like to tweak things a little bit, see what I can do with them, and what difference in shape I can get by just using a little bit of a different bead. However, I'm sticking to the standard bead that Anna has. To start the design, I'm going to start with an opening loop. So here on the one I was playing around with, you can see there's 6 beads. I played around with adding 8-0s, but I prefer it again with 11s like Anna did. So I'm going to add 6 11-0s onto my thread. I have those 6 11-0s onto my needle, and I'm going to let them drop down next to my stop bead. From here, I want you to take your thread and needle and go through the first 3 beads again, starting at the end near the stop bead and going towards the longer piece of thread. That's going to pull these beads into a little circle. From here, it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but we're going to add 3 of our crescents as well as 3 of our bars. I'm going to push those down, the first ones that I'm using in the color range. To add them, they're always going to be added with 3 of our 15-0s before and after them. However, each section is going to be shared as we separate out those beads. So to start, I'm going to be using the gold bead as my accent bead in the middle here. So I'm going to stick with the green bead. Add 3 15s onto your needle, and then pick up your first bar. Again, 3 15s get added. In a circular formation, the thread is coming out that third 11. I'm going to go back into that same third 11-0 seed bead with the needle coming out the end. And that makes my first loop. From here, I'm going to go through the next bead, so the fourth 11-0. Giving a nice tight pull and coming out the fourth 11-0. I'm going to add 3 more 15s. And then I want you to pick up the crescent. When you pick up the crescent, you're going to pick it up so that it's facing down like a rainbow and go through the left-hand side open hole. After this, it's going to share those 3 beads next to that bar there, and I'm going up the 3 beads. So initially on the bar, I added the 3 beads after because that was the first one. From here on, as I add my next bars and bricks, or bars and crescents rather, I'm going to be always going into the 3 beads before. And that's going to face that down. I'm going to go back through that 4th bead here that my thread was coming out of, and that's going to create that second loop. Going through the next bead, I'm going to go through that next 11-0 in line. I'm going to do the same thing again, alternating again with the bar and the crescent. So again, 3 beads go on, and I'm going to grab my next bar. Go back through the 3 beads along the crescent that you just added, as well as back through the 11-0 that your thread is coming out of. Give a nice tight pull. go through the next bead, which will be that 6th bead in line that we put in. After you go through that 6th bead there, you can see you kind of have those 3 dangles on. We're going to get our 4th. 3 more beads go on, and then switch back to a crescent again. After you add the crescent, you're going to go back through the 3 beads next to the bar that you just added. And come out. Go back through the 11L and pull into the next bead, doing the same thing. So we have, you can see we have those almost like petals on. We have 4. We're going to work on our 5th. We're going to pull that stop bead to the top and kind of get it out of the way. 3 beads go on, back to the bar, go through the 3 beads on the side of the crescent that you just added, as well as through the 11-0 that the thread's coming out of. Again through the next bead, and this is going to be my last crescent that I'm adding. So let me lighten this up a little bit for you guys. This is the last crescent that I'm adding, and as I add here, I'm not going to add my initial 3 beads because I'm going to go back to that first row of 3 beads that were added on the initial brick, or initial bar rather, sorry, and go down those 3 beads. It's going to be just like adding beads going down those 3. Again, pick up my crescent, and then go back through the 3 next to that brick. That bar. I keep saying brick, I'm sorry. And then I'm going to pull nice and tightly, and that's going to round out that first little section. So you can see they're all kind of falling towards the bottom of those petals. And what we're going to do now is actually link them all together. To do so, go down the 3 15s that are closest to where your thread and needle are coming out of. Go through your first shape bead. So I'm going through that little bar here. And then as I come out, I'm going to go through the first hole. So the hole that's already linked along all of these, adding one of the 15-0s in that champagne between. So 15 gets added, and I'm going through all these shaped beads, going through that same first hole. And essentially what we're doing is making a beaded bead. This is going to start to pull those shapes downward into that melon shape, or that gourd shape. A 15-0 gets added, and I sew through the next of the first holes. 15 gets added, sew through the next. This first one in particular is going to be a little bit flimsy, and you're going to have a little bit of extra thread showing. Don't worry about that, you won't notice it. As I add in my last of my 15-0s, I'm also going to sew through the first 15-0 that I put on and come out through the crescent. Give a nice tight little yank there and pull all those beads nice and tightly in. From here, it's going to sit a little bit kind of funky with those crescents wanting to turn. Taking the thread and needle, I'm going to get those crescents and the bars to cooperate by taking the thread and needle from the first hole of that crescent to the second hole of the crescent, going through the opposite direction, which is going to put a little bit of thread on the outside of that crescent. From here, we're going to mimic the step that we just did, adding a 15 and going through the empty second hole of all of our shape beads in order. 15 gets added into the second hole of the crescent. So it's always going to be 15 and then crescent bar as we go around. We're adding beads in between each of these 6 shapes and getting it established with that design. Making sure that your thread is not looped over at any point also. As you go in now and add your last bead in, I want you to go back through the crescent that the thread was coming out of, the 15-0, and come out your first of your bar beads. Give a nice tight yank on this then. And there you have your gourd shape. So it seems a lot complicated, or really complicated at the start to kind of get that shape. It gets easier and easier after this first one is established. From here, we're basically going to create this same V shape with the 11-0 between each bead on this side as well. So I know this is kind of a long process to get the little bead, but it starts to go really quickly as you add in. So here again, we're going to do 3 of our 11-0s. And now we have to create that circle at the top with our 11-0s from our 15s. So I have my 3 15s, my 1 11, and I'm going to add 3 more 15s onto the needle. From here, I'm going to circle through that first bar bead there that the thread was coming out of. So 3 15s, 1 11, 3 15s, back through the bar. That creates that first little loop there. From here, I'm going to go up through the first 3 15s that I added and come on out. After this, another 11 gets added into place, 3 15s. I'm going to circle through the next shape, which is the crescent. Give a nice tight pull. Go back up through the 11, or the 15s rather, through the 11. And when I'm out the 11, I'm going to add an 11 and 3 more 15s. Go down into the next shape. So that's another one of my bars. Up through the 15s on the side, on the opposite side, through the 11, add the next grouping. 11, 3 15s, circle around, this time through a crescent bead. And then coming out the other side, I'm going to share and go up through those 3 15s, through the 11, add my next 11, 3 15s, through the next shape bead. So you're circling around completely. Always adding that 11 and the 15, and then going back up through the 11 on the other side to round it out. Coming through the 11 then again that you just added. That gets it nice and tightly. And then here when I'm at the very last bead, so you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 11s right there at the top, I'm going to add my last 11. And then rather than adding 15s, just like we did on the other side, I'm going to go down the 15s that are already there, through the crescent, and back up the 15s. And then ta-da! You have one already done. So I've got one of my little gourds done. I'm going to repeat the exact same thing, except this time I basically need to make it so I have it starting all over again. So I'm going to take my thread and needle back through the first 11-0 that my thread is coming next to, and get ready to brick stitch on basically another, or I'm sorry, ladder stitch on another row of my 11s. To do so, an 11 goes on. I'm going to go back through the 11 that my thread is coming out of. And that 11 that I just added is going to sit right on top. Next, go through the next bead along the base of the 11s. Add another 11 on. Go back through that same one that you came out of. Again, through the next bead. Another bead on. Circle around and through. Next one on. Add a bead. Circle back through the thread that you're coming out of. Go through the next bead. Add a bead on. Circle through. That 111 there is tight. Go through the last bead. You can see I have 4 beads kind of just hanging out there at the top, almost if you push them back in that pretty floral design. I have 1 more bead to add. I'm going to go back through that first bead that my thread is coming out of. And then as I step up, I'm going to go through that bead that I just added, again in that circular fashion. I'll have 2 pieces of thread then on this side here. And now what you're going to do is simple. Take your thread and needle and go back through all of these top 11 O's so that they sit nicely in a loop. And then you are done. There I have my first little gourd on, and I will get ready to add on my next. So I added another one just to have something to hold on to make it easier for you to see as I add another bead onto the little happy fall bracelet there, and the happy harvest. And what I'm going to do is show you again how we add, once the beads are already there, onto and do the next color. So I'm going to pick up my next color of my crescents. I put them to the side as I'm working with them just so I can kind of keep track of what I'm doing. I'll pick a color for a middle that I haven't used yet. All right, so coming out here, it's whether or not you want to keep it consistent, that you have all the crescents lining up or all the bricks lining, or the bars lining up. You can switch that if you want to by switching to a bar here. I'm going to keep it all lining up, so my whole bracelet, the crescents are going to line up. That being said, when I add my first bead, I'm going to look across to the other 11O and see what bead that is. So again, add 3 beads, which is always going to be your rotation here. Add your crescent with that rainbow side down on the left-hand side. 3 more 15s. And then back through that 11O that the thread is coming out of, as well as the next 11O in line. Coming out of that, 3 more of your 15s get added. You add your bar through one of the holes. And then rather than adding 3 more 15s, you're going back up through the 3 15s on the second side of the crescent. Go back through the 11O that your thread is coming out of, as well as the next one in line. Give a nice little tight yank there. Again, looping around, 3 15s, another one of my crescents. Pick up the 3 15s on the side of that bar. Back through the 11 that the thread is coming out of. And then also through the next 11. Again, repeating, 3 15s onto the next shape, because every other shape is going to be added. Pick up the 3 15s that are sitting right there on that side, through the 11, and through the next 11 you just added. Again, 3 more 15s, adding your last crescent, through the 15s that sit on the side of the last bead added, through that 11O that your thread is currently coming out of, and then also through the next 11O. Here, when I get ready to add my last of my shapes, I'm going to know, because I only have one sitting there, and also there's 15s on both sides, I'm going to go down the 15s of the first bead that I put on, add in my shape, and then up the 15s on the other side through the 11O. Give a nice tight yank, and that gets all of those 6 beads there in place. From here, go through the next 11O in line, down through the 15s right below it, down through the first hole of that first shape, and now I'm going to add in my alternate color of my 15s between the first hole of all of these beads. So there's already thread and beads kind of sitting on the sides of it. These are going to connect all of those holes together. Adding in my beads here between each of those shapes. Again, just doing this first hole to begin with, turning the project as I work with it. Kind of cementing that position downward. And spinning around. As you come back to the first bead here, I want you to go through that first 15O that you added, as well as through the next shape bead, which may be a crescent or a bar, depending on what you did. Step down to the second hole of that same bead, which is going to turn the needle around facing the opposite way and put a little bit of thread on the exterior of the bead. From here, continue with that same 15O color that you're using for the middle. which in her design, Anna used the same color the whole way throughout. I'm using that champagne color, that lighter gold, going in and adding that between each bead now, the second hole of all those shape beads. Once I have that second hole of all the shape beads connected, it's time to go in and make my little loop-de-loops, adding in my green 15s and my 11-Os. As you come back to the start of this loop, you're going to give a nice tight pull on that gourd, go through the first 15 and come out that first shape. Now when we get to doing our finished little section here, the first one that we do, we put 15s on, then the 11, then our 3 15s again. Go back through the project, circling around. So it sits right up there on the end. Go through those first 3 15s. And as you come out the top of the 3 15s then, the pattern is the same the whole way around the rest of the shapes. Adding an 11, 3 15s, going over to the next shape from the opposite side, looping around, going into the second hole, back up through the 15s that were already there, and through the 11 you just added. Add another 11, 3 more 15s, jump over to the next shape through that second hole, needle coming towards you. Back up then through the 15s that were already there on the opposite side, through the 11, add on another 11, 3 more 15s into the next shape. So it's very repetitive once you get going. And because the most you have to count to number-wise is 3, it's really easy to keep track. Through the next 11, add an 11, my 3 15s go on, back through my next shape, up through. So I'm just showing because it's a little bit confusing when you do your first one. So I figured I would show this whole second one, or in this case the third one, that way I had more to hold on to for you. Here when I'm coming out the end, there's 15s already on both sides. So I know all I have to do is add an 11, go down those 3 15s on the side, through my last crescent, and then up the 15s on the side. After I do this, I'm going to grab onto these 11-Os here and sew through all of these 11-Os. After you sew through and connect all the 11-Os, you're going to ladder stitch on another 11-O. So my thread is coming out of this 11-O here. I'm adding another bead and another bead on right there at that connection point, adding a bead on, sewing back through that same 11-O and over to the next bead. Again, another bead gets added on, spinning back through the bead my thread is coming out of in a circular fashion, and through the next bead in line. This is going to add on 6 more 11-Os as I spin the whole way around the end of this little Happy Harvest bead. So I'm adding in my next bead, circling around, and I have 1 more bead to add. As I add in my 6th bead, I'm going to circle back around and through that first bead that my thread was coming out of. I'm going to circle back around through the first bead that I added in this second group of 6. And then take the thread and needle and go back through all 6 of these 11-Os. Pull them nice and tight, and that's going to make them a tighter, nicer unit. As you circle around, give a nice little pull. Those beads are ready in place, and now it is time to start over and do your next little Happy Harvest gourd section. And you can see the difference of doing the same color of 15-Os versus a different color where that color issue pops a little bit. The other thing that you can do if that thread drives you crazy is add a 15-O in. As I'm progressing with the bracelet here, you can see that I have 8 of my little Happy Harvest beaded beads done, and I want to show you how to tie on thread. So chances are you are going to need to add thread. I know I had initially told you about 5 feet. That's not going to get the whole project done. You may need to add thread 1 or 2 times. To add thread, I'm going to show you the method that I think is the easiest to do so. Some people will prefer to sew back into the project. That's up to you. What I do is when I have a little bit of thread left, and here's a good place to add thread, is between 2 of the larger 11 seed beads. I'm going to take my needle off my thread and grab a new piece of thread. I burned this thread to about 5 feet, and I have this new piece. I'm going to put the new piece under the old piece and tie a knot around the old piece of thread with the new piece. So the old piece of thread there underneath is not involved in this loop. I'm just literally tying it around. Give a nice tight pull. And then I'm going to take that new piece of thread while holding the old piece in my right hand. Take that left hand piece and just push it down towards my project. It's going to almost disappear then into the project. With the 2 thread ends then that are left, the little tail that's left that I took the needle off and the tail that's left on the new, I'm going to tie a square knot right over left and then switch hands to do left over right. Do a nice tight knot again. If you need to, you can even grab your pliers and kind of pull that tighter. Then what I'm going to do is go in with my thread zap or my thread burner, burn down these thread ends, but I'm not going to burn down completely. A lot of times I will go back with some super glue glue and actually glue that knot that was created. I'm also going to go in at the very end, take that thread burner and burn those thread edges down. At this point then I'm going to take the new piece of thread that I have here, take my needle nose pliers, flatten that out nice and flat. You can see it got flat there. And then use that to help thread my needle. Oops. And get ready to progress and add in more of your Happy Harvest beads. So now I have my new thread on my needle ready to go, and I will progress with my design and keep going. So you're going to continue adding those, and just to show you too, the color order that I've been doing, it's somewhat random. I'm not actually doing a pattern, and I'm not always doing the same colors in the middle that I did before, just to kind of keep it fresh and really keep it that random design versus something that you can go very formulated and very similar in design. So keep building on and adding on more of your little beaded beads. Once you're done with your actual little melons or pumpkins or little fall gourds here, you're going to get ready to put on the clasp. So Anna did the clasp one way, which I can easily explain to you, and then I'm going to show you how I did the clasp the other way to make it a little bit more uniform kind of at the end. So what Anna did when you get to the end is she made a loop going from one side of her grouping of the 11 O's to the other side using just 15 O seed beads. What I'm going to show you is how to downgrade from those 6 beads to 3 beads and then tying that in to the clasp closure. I ended up with 11 of the gourds to make it to fit my wrist. Anna's was a little bit more standard size, and that one had 13 of the actual connection points and the little links. So to do the end of the bracelet, I have 3 more 11s sitting here. I'm coming out one of the 11 O's, and I'm going to add an 11 just like I would if I was getting ready to add my next little harvest bead. So I'm going to sit that right on top of that one. And then what I'm going to do is sew through 2 beads rather than 1. Coming out that second bead then, add another 11 in that same kind of square stitch fashion. Get that one sitting up there. After you're out there, sew through again 2 beads. So this is going to downgrade it from my 6 beads to my 3 beads. Add 1 more bead and sew back through the bead that your thread is coming out of. I should also mention I took off the stop bead and put a needle on this end. From here, I'm going to sew back through those 3 beads. So I'm going back up through the last 11 that I added. And then just like we've been doing where we were circling through the 6 beads, I'm just going to circle through the 3 beads. And that's going to create almost like an end cone here at the end, going from those 6 beads to those 3 beads. From here, I'm going to add my clasp. I'm a person that I really like to be very thorough when I add my clasp, so I have a fair amount of thread going through there. The link or the hole on this is a little bit tiny to get a thread wire guard or a thread protector on, so I'm going to go right through the clasp. Picking up the clasp, I'm going to sew through the loop, and then I'm going to go right into the next seed bead, the next 11-0 in line. From here, coming out, I'm going to pick up that loop again of the clasp, and I'm going to sew through the next 11-0. Sewing through again, I'm going to go through the loop of the clasp and sew through the next 11-0 in line. What I want to do also is make sure that this is forcing that loop to kind of sit flat. So you're going to go into the loop at all different angles. Once I go through once each way like that, I'll skip a bead and I'll go back through the loop. Go through the loop, skip over a bead to the other side and go back through the bead. After I have about 4 to 6 times through that loop, I'm going to actually downgrade and get ready to tie off the end of my thread. Taking the thread and needle, I'm going to go back through the first layer of 11-0s, that grouping of 6 through one of them. I'm going to go down through some of the 15-0s and come out near one of my shape beads. From here, I'm going to do some knots, going underneath one of my bridge threads, making a loop, and then taking the needle and thread, sewing through that loop that I just created to do a nice little knot there. I'm going to take it back to another place in the project, sewing along the thread line so you don't see any extra thread. Go underneath those bridge threads, make the loop, and sew back through that loop that you just created. I usually do this about 3 times, making sure that I'm not going over any beads and making sure that that knot does not expose any extra thread. So if it's hanging out like it was just there, you kind of move it down along the beads. From here then, I'm going to go in and I get to burn off all my thread ends. So I had to add some thread in spots. I'll go down with a thread burner and burn that down. And I tried as much as possible to add my thread near kind of green beads, so that way you don't notice them as much. At the end here then, I'll take my wire thread, or my thread here, and my thread burner, and burn that thread down as well. I love when you can burn the thread down and the color that you used and make it so you can't even see the connection point. If you want to also, you can go in with some super glue glue and burn that and glue that thread as well. So that's always an option, is to use glue as well before the thread burner. Once you're done with all of these burns and getting all of these threads apart, you are going to have your finished process. So this Happy Harvest bracelet, like I said, you can really make it look like gourds, like pumpkins. You can make it look like Christmas bells. Another idea, Anna had the bars in with the crescents. You can do it all with crescents as well, and you'll get more of that ball shape from the original design of that slice of heaven. So that's another design idea that you can do. You can also keep these separate rather than sewing them together and seaming them at the end, almost like you did at the very end of the clasp. And what that's going to do is make them almost like beaded beads that you can use individually on a piece. This is also a great piece that you can do a necklace with and have a necklace design because it's nice and flexible with those 11-0 kind of connector points. From here then, like I said, your bracelet is nice and completed. So if you do need any of the materials to do this Happy Harvest bracelet, you can go back to the beginning of the video where I listed out the materials and kind of the colors that were used. You can also go below the video to that date stamp that says when the video was produced and hit that down arrow or show more button depending on kind of what device you're looking at this on, and you can gather materials and shop from me at PotomacBeads.com. You can also stay connected with us by checking out our Facebook and our Instagram and Pinterest, as well as, again, checking out PotomacBeads.com. Also, if you would like, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel, as well as ask to become a member of our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. There, I usually show the new products. Our customers post ideas, they ask questions, and it's an interactive forum for everybody to kind of increase the knowledge and inspiration around the beads and the beading world. There's some wonderful designers on there that post great, inspiring things. And then also people are looking for help and able to answer questions if people post those as well. So check that out. It'll keep you really, really informed. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Anna, for this fun design, and have fun creating the Happy Harvest bracelet.